Okay, welcome to this special Travolution COVID-19 webcast. Today we're going to look at a very specific part of the travel industry, but a really exciting and emerging sector, and that being holiday or vacation rentals. And we've got three speakers who are experts in the field, who we're going to talk to about, firstly, the impact of the pandemic, but also what we see going forward, the opportunities and some of the challenges. So I'm delighted today that we've got three fantastic speakers. We've got Merillee Karr, who is the founder and CEO of Under the Doormat, which is a UK-based provider. She is also the chair of the UK Short-Term Accommodation Association. So she's got an industry role there as well. But we've got Deborah Heather, who's the Director of Quality and Tourism. We'll hear from Deborah in a minute about what that is and what it does. And finally, Celia Pronto, who joins us from New South Wales. And she is the fairly recently appointed MD of Love Home Swap, so another provider in the sector. So thank you and welcome, guys. Thanks for doing this for us. Firstly, let's ask Merillee. You sit there, you've got a company of your own that you've had to keep going through this period, and you can speak on behalf of the sector as a whole. Just a quick word on what you've done with Under the Doormat in order to get through this period and protect your business for the future so you can come out of this in good shape.
Well, look, really, really wonderful to be here, and I think it's a great moment to talk about where we are as a sector. I think luckily we're hopefully through the worst of it, and I think starting to see as other countries emerge out of it that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that's a really positive thing. If I think about it as a company owner, it's probably the most difficult time that I've had since I set up the business because, we started 2020, we had record bookings, record numbers of owners we were working with, and this was set to be our best year yet by a significant margin. Yeah. As a company, we closed an investment round back in February, so everything was all guns blazing for growth, not just in the UK, but also internationally. And we had also created a second arm, if you will, called Hesperia, which is where we distribute and help smaller operators to compete in the digital world. And so all of this was in progress. And in fact, we were talking about how the Short Stay show happened back in early March and was one of the last conferences that took place. And even then where, people were starting to think that COVID was going to be an issue and starting to be a bit fearful, there was a great turnout at the show and I think still a lot of momentum in the industry. The interim period, so, talking mid-March all the way through till now, we've seen drops in bookings well below the levels that we had last year, even with underlying growth in our portfolio. And I think, anyone who's operating who claims that they're fully booked, you just have to wonder where these bookings are coming from. But ultimately, as a sector, the sector has seen between 70 and 90% drop in bookings across the world. Now, for any sector, 10%, 20% drop is material. So when we're talking this level of drop, it is pretty fundamental and I think is shaking the industry to the core. I feel fortunate as a company because there are a couple of things which are really good for us. One is that we have an asset-light model. So we don't own any assets. We don't take leases on assets. And so we were able to drop our cost structure very, very quickly because we built the business to be flexible for seasonality. I never really imagined that I was going to need that seasonality flux for a crisis like COVID. But it proved very valuable because the costs could drop in line with the drop in demand very quickly and help us to preserve cash, which is, of course, cash is king in these times. We've been very fortunate in the UK, obviously, with the government support that we've had, everything from business rates relief, bounce back loans, grants for the hospitality sector, although sometimes a little harder to get than they should be, and obviously the furlough scheme. So a number of things that are there to help companies, and certainly as a business, we've benefited from that. I think also, we're very lucky because Most of our owners are people who don't rely on this as their primary source of income. These are often second homeowners, primary residents who travel frequently. And so for our owners, it's actually, of course, not been great, but isn't devastating for them in the way that it might be for some hosts who really rely on this as their main income.
And most of your properties in London, Merillee?
Yeah, so most of our properties are in London. And as I say, with Hosperia, with our kind of marketing and distribution arm, then we have properties outside of London as well. I think what we can say is that, now looking forward, we are hopeful that, leading up into July, that we will start to see some easing up and bookings starting to return as people get confidence that they will be able to travel, but very much in a staycation world. Fortunately, the figures of outbound versus inbound in the UK means that actually a staycation world may not be too painful, because Brits actually spend more on outbound holidays than visitors coming into Britain spend. So if all that international travel stays in the UK, there is hope for the UK market. So I think that's certainly promising. But I think whether it's property managers, platforms, suppliers to the industry, I mean, there's a whole ecosystem that we're talking about here. And I think everyone has found it difficult. But, obviously Celia and others also worked with us, because the first thing we did was we said, well, we now have all these empty homes, and we launched NHS Homes. Because as an industry, it was our opportunity to do something good, to help in a time of crisis. And companies like Love Home Swap, Sykes, One Fine Stay, Vive, all of the players in the industry came together. We had 2,500 homes across the whole of the UK being offered. We had thousands of workers requesting places. And within a matter of weeks, we were able to create a matching system and get that up and running. I think we're totaling now more than 20 million worth of stays that have been donated for free from owners and companies in the sector. And that's just an absolutely incredible thing to do when the sector is under the kind of pressure that we are. But I think that shows the kind of community spirit that we have, and that concept of sharing. I mean, we all come from the sharing economy. So I think that's been exciting to see that kind of ray of light, and actually coming together as an industry in a positive way, despite all of the difficult times.
Yeah, you mentioned the short stay show, which was like second week in March, I think, wasn't it? It was actually the final week when Excel was open, as where WTM is normally held, and we knew that was going to be it. We didn't know in a few weeks' time we'd be talking about it being the Nightingale Hospital. So it just showed how quickly things moved, actually. And now there was discussion at the show about the looming COVID issue, and you had some sessions there, and there was some, ranging opinions from some pretty dire to, I think it'll be okay. Looking back, do you think we were all a little bit over optimistic that this wasn't going to hit our markets quite as it has? Looking back and seeing now we know what's happened.
Well, I think the reality is no one really knew what this is going to be like, because this is unprecedented. I think we have to remember that. The financial crisis in 2008 pales in comparison to what we're seeing now with economies shut down. And certainly in that instance, there was an economic crisis, but there wasn't a travel crisis. And I think in many ways, I don't think the sector was prepared for how quickly it would spread to so many countries, and the impact that it would have for such a long period of time. And I think even for the optimist in me, and I tend to be an optimist, I think we are looking at next summer before things could potentially return to normal. So I think for companies in the sector, again, at all levels within the ecosystem, it's in many ways survival of the fittest. Those that have the best cash reserves, those that have the most flexible models, those that have, the least assets that they've got to service are going to be most likely to make it through this tough time and come out the other side. And I think that will in some ways create opportunities for consolidation, for all these other kinds of things. But of course, for a number of operators, this is going to be a very difficult time trying to navigate through. And especially as we start to see the government support ramping down, it's unclear at this point what additional support will be provided for hospitality. And certainly as a short-term accommodation association, we're going to be working hard with government to ensure that while there is a dampening effect on our sector because of the measures they're taking to protect health and safety, that there is support from the government to ensure that our sector can come out the other side and be a thriving sector again in the future.
Yeah. Okay. Let's bring in Celia now. So you've got another brand. You've had to keep going. You joined in January as MD, or became MD in January. So it's been a bit of an interesting time for you in the new job. How have you reacted to COVID? You've got a slightly different model, I think, than others because of the nature of what you do. But how have you been able to cope with what's happened over the last 3 months?
Yeah, so as you said, Lee, we are slightly different in the sense that we're a members-only portal, but effectively we allow travellers to see the world through the power of home sharing. So we sit squarely in the sharing economy, which is why I can have this lovely virtual background of one of our homes in New South Wales. The key thing for us when all of this happened, I guess similar to Merillee, we are asset light. We don't own any of the homes on our platform. We are the technology that facilitates those swaps taking place. And so our first focus was obviously on our employees and ensuring that they were safe. And then from a customer perspective, we've really focused on community. That's been our really, really big focus. The one thing that differentiates Love Home Swap from many other platforms out there is the fact that people who join us and members who join us do see themselves as joining a community and as being part of that community. So our focus, whether it's from a content perspective, but also when we've thought through our policies and refunds, have all been based on community and how do we make sure we do the right thing for them. So, on our platform, there are two ways in which people can swap. They can either just do a direct swap where I might come and stay in your home and you come and stay in mine. But the other way that we have is a non-simultaneous method where people can swap using points. And we immediately made the decision that we were going to refund everybody's points for cancelled trips. We weren't going to hold on to any of those, and any of the fees that they had paid, we were going to refund all of those. So that was the first thing we did. And then we started to look at how we could give our members a degree of comfort around home swapping. So we introduced everything from swap guarantees for people who were looking to join us but weren't too sure about the timing of joining us. So we basically just said, look, join us, sign up, and if you don't get a successful swap in your first year, your second year will be free. Okay. We offered to basically extend people's memberships by 3 months for free. So if they signed up as a new member, they could get 15 months for the price of 12. And if they were an existing member, they could choose to extend their membership for an extra 3 months free of charge. And they had the option to either just freeze their membership, which effectively removes their access to be able to view inventory, and it removes their own home from the platform, or they could choose to extend their membership. And that's meant that our community has been able to keep communicating and keep talking throughout this period. And what we have seen, again, similar to what Merillee said, everyone's been impacted by this. One of the metrics we use to gauge member strength and the strength of the community is the level of swaps being agreed. Yep. And we look at that on a 14-day rolling basis. And as we went into the eye of the storm, we were tracking at about a 10% level of swaps agreed versus pre-COVID levels. And we've seen that steadily increase, particularly in the last 2 to 3 weeks, to the extent where we're now tracking at 27%. So we are seeing the recovery coming back strongly. And actually, I think one of the benefits we have in industry and the sector is the fact that leisure travel will return faster than business travel, and confidence typically tends to come back to leisure.
You think that? Because actually, yes, people think maybe the opposite is true. Business travel will come back first and leisure may.
No, when you look at the financial crash and the return post that, leisure travel tends to lead the recovery.
So for the homeowners, you say they're swapping, and they're swapping, or they are certainly communicating on your platform. What's the general level of concern they've got? I guess it's different because they pay to list the property on your site. That's how it works.
No, they pay a membership fee. So once they've paid the membership fee, they can list and they can swap as many times as they like. So the communication we're seeing, most of it is a lot of people saying they are desperate to get out of their homes and they are desperate to travel. What is interesting is the trends we're seeing around swaps. So a lot of people are looking to stay in their country of residence. And that's certainly the activity we're seeing, the swaps being agreed, really up until about October this year, are people looking to stay local. And then from October onwards, we're seeing a lot of international swaps kicking back in, to the extent where our furthest out swap agreed is a US to Denmark swap in August 2022.
And are they talking about increasingly about things like standards, cleanliness, sanitation? Are they interested in that kind of thing to give themselves a bit of confidence that they can travel again?
So it's not something that's come up a lot in either the social media, in our private closed groups, or indeed in any of the contacts we're getting to our customer service centre. But what we do recognise is that this could be an area of concern for our members. So we've published guidelines, which are a combination of the CDC guidelines and Public Health England around best practice. We've also made available to our members a checklist that they can use to make sure that they have done everything that they need to do. And then an optional little welcome card that they can print off and make available for their guests to reassure them that they've taken the appropriate hygiene standards into account and have cleaned their home. Yeah. Interestingly, there's a lot of data we're seeing that, and in fact, Hospitality Net recently published an article on this, which states that a lot of consumers are going to be nervous about staying in big resorts and hotels, and concerned about particularly public spaces in those areas, and therefore are looking to house swaps or staying in private homes as a great alternative. Yeah.
That seems obvious, and seems like it is certainly a trend we'll see. So let's, at that point, given we start talking about standards, let's bring in Deborah. Just before we start, Deborah, just explain what Quality in Tourism is, what it does, and what role you're going to play.
Sure. So Quality in Tourism is an assessment body. We basically accredit and assess properties in terms of, in the past, predominantly around quality. Yeah. We came up with something called Safe, Clean and Legal about 3 years ago, because we felt there was a real gap in the market around people behaving responsibly, I guess, mm-hmm. and felt very much that robust cleaning protocols should be part of the whole industry's ethos anyway. Clearly, we made some good traction within the industry. We've worked with the STAA, Merillee's own company, has been accredited by us. But this has been a catalyst for us to things are pretty insane, I have to say. Yeah. So we've worked with environmental health officers in the UK, working out COVID-19 cleaning protocols, just to give people robust information. From that, we've changed our accreditation to be much more robust. So we've got checklists, they've got risk assessments, they've got all sorts of things they should be doing to ensure that they can just protect people. In the UK, it's been made part of our RIDDOR process. So that's kind of when you need to report an accident or an incident. And if there is an outbreak of COVID-19, we would have to do that to central government. So this is a really focused tool to help operators just make sure that doesn't happen, protect their staff as well as their guests. Yeah.
So you've actually come up with new set of protocols. I mean, what you were doing before absolutely aligns with what you're meant to be doing now, I suppose.
Exactly.
So you're ahead of your time in many sense, but you've had to come up with new protocols specifically around virus protection, and I guess social distancing or cleanliness, certainly. That is now in place.
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, if you think of these as the equivalent of norovirus protocols, and we would always have those if somebody had an outbreak, what they should do. But now it's custom and practice. It has to be custom and practice in terms of people protecting, as I say, guests and staff. We have to do the most we can to make sure there isn't a rerun of outbreaks, and that everybody's behaving responsibly.
Yeah. So just give some examples of what property owners will be expected to do that they
Yeah,
maybe were doing previously.
It's things like having proper reporting procedures, so making guests think about if they're feeling ill before they're coming, don't come, kind of thing. Also the same with our staff, so having a regular sense check with staff, so that are cleaning staff particularly. It's using PPE equipment, it's doing everything from limiting surfaces within a property so that you have less to clean. You'll have to go through the whole soapy water stuff and then go through the disinfectant process. There's particular risk in bathrooms. Ventilation always helps, but we're not dictating it. We're sort of giving them examples of best practice and then giving them the tools to manage the risk and mitigate the risk in their own properties and homes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, we did one of these with another domestic supplier, and even down to things like taking some stuff out of properties, which just gives you extra things to have to clean. So you mentioned the backgammon board, maybe, you know, what it's nice to have, but actually was going to cause problems, just don't have it in there for time being.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff they don't know now is how long it lives on things like throws or cushions. So if they're not a necessity, really they're nice, but don't have them in there. And I guess the thing that our accreditation includes is we check the risk assessments and help advise once they're completed, but we also do a visit. We visit every property to just check. There's a lot of noise out there, and I've come up with my new favorite phrase is clean washing. It has to be more than a tick box exercise. It has to be robust and embedded. Otherwise, as an industry, our reputation might be shot.
Yes. So as Merillee, as Celia said earlier, that so leisure will come back, and there's certainly obviously going to be a domestic boom. I mean, potentially this summer, if it's still difficult for the Brits to travel overseas, you can see the UK doing very well out of it. So I think there's a latent degree of confidence among consumers that they want to travel, and people always want to travel. Part of the trust side of it, the other side is the host destinations, the host communities, you know, who will maybe be concerned that they're going to be people coming from elsewhere, and maybe they're going to come with the infection. So what do brands like yours and the association, what role can they play in reassuring those host communities that it's good to be traveling again and people coming to their communities to enjoy holidays?
I mean, look, I think it's really simple and straightforward. From my point of view, trust comes by professionalism. And I think, you know, obviously at Under the Doormat and other professional companies in the sector are doing things like getting accredited with quality in tourism and demonstrating that you've been inspected by a third party and that you meet all the standards that a consumer can expect. And I think, you know, where in the past consumers were happy with, you know, reviews on websites and things like that, that works if you want to know a good location, if it's kind of a nice home. But when you're talking about standards, that's something very different. And clearly the traditional industry, hotels, etc., always have their star ratings and these sorts of things. You know, and at an industry level, STA is very proud to be partnering with Quality in Tourism. And, you know, the timing couldn't have been better. You know, this is a program we got up and running over the last couple of years. And now we're in a position that any host and any company across the UK can get accredited. It's not expensive. And it's great to have someone who understands those things very well coming and almost consulting you and guiding you as a company or as a host on what you can do to ensure that your guests are safe, your staff are safe, and all those sorts of things. And, you know, I think consumers are going to be increasingly looking for that stamp of approval. And I think that will give people trust beyond just what reviews we're ever able to do. And so I think, you know, what this crisis will do is a couple of things. One, I think it will drive people who've never tried our sector before to stay in homes. So I think overall, we probably will come out and see that our sector grows. But I think the segment that's going to grow quickest are the professional operators who are able to demonstrate those quality standards. And that's going to tend to be more, you know, the premium and luxury end of the market in many cases. But you don't need to be a premium or luxury operator to meet these good standards. And so I think that's going to be increasingly important. But I think because everyone in the industry is working together and we have these standards we can all adopt, there's no reason why the whole industry can't raise its bar. And as Deborah said, that the trust in our industry can grow as a result of this crisis.
What about sort of recognition of the standards that are available? Obviously, quality in tourism is probably one of a number out there. Is there some work to be done to get that in front of people and the consumer so that they A, recognise it, and B, trust it as well? Because you might have competing standards, they'd be confused with trust.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're certainly as an industry trying to ensure that we've got one single set of standards. We're at the moment working with government, Tourism Britain, other different areas to make sure that anyone who is a host or an operating company knows that there is a set of standards that they need to, adhere to. As an industry, we made a choice a couple of years ago to partner with Quality in Tourism because we felt that they had the combination of many years of experience across the broader hospitality sector, having run the Visit England scheme and things like that, but also had the innovative thinking about how to adjust to a new sector where things are not just as simple as you have 2 bedside tables and a gym, and that's how you qualify a star rating. So, the subjectivity of a home and what quality means, required a bit of flexibility that some of the traditional hotel models didn't have.
Yeah. So, Celia, I guess some of the quality assurance, your model comes from the community because they're swapping homes. So particularly with those people who are swapping like for like, if someone's got a home that's not well kept, people get to know about it very quickly within the community because they'll provide the feedback. So there's a bit of, in the way you operate, there's a bit of sort of self-regulation going on there. Is that good enough, or do you want to see these industry-wide standards imposed, or not imposed, but certainly recognised?
Yeah, it's a little bit different for us because effectively we can provide guidelines, but we can't mandate, and we certainly don't have a way in which we can check, given that the homes on our platform are globally in over 100 countries around the world. So our system does rely very much on the community aspect, but the other piece I would say is trust, because ultimately I'm coming to stay in your home and you're staying in mine. I want to make sure that I'm safe in your home, and equally you want to make sure you're safe in mine. And so a lot of how the platform works is through trust as much as anything else. And I guess that's what makes it slightly different from a typical rental model where I might be staying in somebody's home and paying a fee for it. Because it is this reciprocity, there is a very large degree of trust. And typically what we see is people are not only doing home swaps, but they're actually doing a bit of a life swap. They tend to use each other's cars, they tend to use each other's baby seats and baby toys, and they even look after each other's pets. So there's a very high degree of trust and confidence in each other when they conduct a swap.
Isn't it like the film? Isn't Love Home Swap based on the film Holiday, where that exact thing happens?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, it is. That was the inspiration for Love Home Swap. So we're very grateful to the movie.
So you wouldn't impose standards then as Love Home Swap, even though I guess your brand, does rely on people trusting the brand as well, but you wouldn't impose anything?
We wouldn't impose it purely because we have no way of being able to validate it and ensure that it's being adhered to. And so what we don't want to do is to impose something which effectively becomes a bit of a hollow requirement of our members. What we'd much rather do is provide all the guidelines and support and signpost best practice and give them all the tools that they might need. And of course, we have our customer service team who are available to anyone who needs any additional assistance. Generally, what we find is our homeowners are incredibly responsible and also responsive to the needs of their guests. And you can judge that by the quality of the interaction between them when they're trying to arrange home swaps. So from our perspective, we do see a high level of responsibility amongst our members.
Yeah. This idea of verifying that things have been done actually as they should have done. There's one thing putting a badge on saying yes, they've accredited Deborah, but it's just checking that actually is happening. It's not just sticking plastic, and it's not a badge. So it's difficult because this can be especially with cottages and villas. They're very dispersed. You need lots of, it's very hands-on, lots of people involved here. Are there ways now that you can monitor the activity of providers to make sure they are doing what they say they are doing?
I think Celia's market's slightly different, as she rightly points out. It's a sort of mutual trust system. I don't think you could do that with the general public. I think, as I mentioned before, there's sort of clean washing issues out there. At one stage, do you remember all the big hotel groups all came out with their whole, we've got this strategy, we've got this policy, but if no third party is checking that, that's just marking your own homework, really. They might have the best policy in the world, but is it applied properly? I think it's a difficult situation. I think the general public does need protecting. There are stuff, and nationally, we will end up with a sort of self-accreditation model from our own government systems. Unfortunately, I think that's a risky policy personally, but I would do, given the role that I'm in. But it's actually easier to manage in the UK because we're a small, compact country and we can do that. And actually, we're having conversations about worldwide rollouts. But I do think it will necessitate this move away from pure digital in the open market, where there's, Joe Public guests. It's all very well somebody reporting lots of times on a OTA that the property isn't very clean and them challenging the property owner that it's not very clean. But if a guest notices it, then it's probably a lot dirtier than it actually appears to be. So it's not a professional checking that it's clean. So I do think we're going to end up with a model, and digitalization is great, and we all get a worldwide audience because of it, and it's superb from that perspective, but it doesn't solve all of the problems in the industry. And I think we have to take a view that some of them, we still need the traditional route with the professional checking some of the stuff. I've
seen that. I mean, I've seen a lot of companies, really innovative companies, creating technologies that allow them to check what the cleaning people are doing, what they're actually going through a checklist of things. They can actually send pictures to show and demonstrate that they're doing what they're doing. It's clever stuff. And again, that will provide the reassurance. Is that part of what you would recommend?
No, I mean, it doesn't replace swabbing a room and checking for bacteria and that sort of stuff. So I wouldn't. I think these are great tools. So I used to run hotels, and I think these are great tools that replace what used to be the old property management systems, where a hotelier or a cleaner would tick through. Somebody in those days would go around the room and check it again. But it was just a way of reporting that everything had been done. So it's an online checklist. It's not a conclusive level of cleanliness. So it does concern me that we get too reliant in those areas.
That's one of the things, Merillee. This is a growing sector, and there's some small providers and people who are doing things in a very much a sharing kind of ethos. But at the bigger level, at the digital level, you've got the big boys getting into this area, the Bookings and Expedias and the Airbnbs, and really industrializing this sector. And so the question would be, how can you maintain standards when you want to increase standards, to a higher level, when you're going such mass market and people, and there's obviously pressure on costs when that happens as well. So is that a dilemma the industry sort of faces at the minute, this between going big mass and mass market, and then being very, very clear that we're doing things in the right way?
Well, I mean, I think in many ways, you have the OTAs, the Expedias, the Airbnbs, the Bookings, but at the end of the day, those guys are platforms. So all they're doing is the matching. I mean, their budgets are primarily on marketing. So what they allow is channels to distribution. I mean, in many ways, the reason we built Hosperia was because lots of small providers need those channels to market, to reach audiences across the world and everything. But, they need the technology, they need the capability. Also, these big behemoths, you want some negotiating power with those guys to be able to make sure that you're not overpaying and that you know how to get the best out of them. But I think ultimately our industry is built on small providers. The majority of the industry actually has between 1 and 100 properties in a portfolio. So whether that's individual hosts, that's about 60% of the market overall. And then of the remaining 40%, the vast majority of that are smaller operators. So in many ways, actually, our industry is hyper-local. Many of these companies are in a specific country, a specific city or geography or holiday destination. And I think in many ways that's a positive thing, because they know the local environment, they know the risks, and they're very involved in their business. This is also a very entrepreneurial sector in that regard. So I think that can help with standards. But I think because it's so disaggregated, that's why you need associations like the Short-Term Accommodation Association, the EHHA, VRMA in North America, working together and partnering with companies like Quality and Tourism, so that every operator doesn't need to be an expert on all of these things, because you need standards that everyone understands and knows about. And to your earlier point, that there is a single standard, ideally, that everyone can follow, so it doesn't get confusing. And I think the more that associations and partners can play that role to simplify and standardize across the industry, I think the stronger the industry will be, without having to give up the fact that we are local and personal, and there's some fantastic businesses out there.
I suppose what you're saying is that the standards and quality assurance, that comes in at a lower level than the big platform players, which you may use to distribute. But actually, they may want to be able to demonstrate that to their customers, to give them the reassurance that they're booking product they can trust as well. So they could help in spreading the news about these standards as well, spreading the awareness.
Oh, absolutely. And the more that they work together at an association level, because it's a nightmare. If you're an operator and Booking has one set of standards, Expedia has another, Airbnb has another, and it's all about ticking boxes on all these platforms, you've got to ask the question, what value is that, versus having an industry-wide standard that everyone can agree on, and that all the platforms can display the companies and the individual hosts who meet that criteria. That seems far simpler, but I suspect it's going to be very difficult at a global level, getting all of these platforms to agree on one approach. And that is sometimes the challenge when you have such large companies in the sector with slightly different models and focus areas. So yeah, we'll keep trying.
Let's go back to some of the customer trends we might see. So even within the sector, there are different types of properties in different places, and there's people saying that it might be difficult in the future for properties in cities, for instance, or city breaks just generally may be more difficult in the near future compared to sort of going into the middle of the countryside, where you can clearly self-isolate more easily. Merillee, start with you, and then I'll ask Celia to discuss this. You've got a lot of properties in London, in a large city, which may be considered to be more risky than going off into the wilds. What do you see happening there? Do you think that's going to be a short-term concern amongst consumers, and they'll come back to cities eventually?
I mean, look, I think what we're going to see is a different mix of customers. So, where people before might have lived in London and had a second home outside, in many cases, they might actually choose to live outside and commute into London and just rent when they need a place to stay there, and different things like that. So I think we'll see some different customers appearing because of the changes that this is creating. I think as well, we may start to see the business travelers prefer the privacy and the separation of a home compared to a hotel, which they might have stayed in the past. So for our sector, we may see that there are some shifts in cities in that regard. But I think overall, it's also about helping people to see, what cities have to offer. In London, we're very fortunate to have Santander bikes. Local councils are actually creating more cycle lanes. So in many ways, you can actually see London from a completely different perspective than you might have in the past. And it's a lot emptier than what you might have seen if you came here in a typical August. So in many ways, for those who have that relaxation that they want to still try to travel and all these things, actually the experiences that they can have, I think, are probably better than what they could expect if they were traveling in normal times. But yeah, I think it's yet to be seen how quickly people's memories and fears go away, and that we get back to some state of normality, whatever that will look like. But I think cities are inherently an attractive place to be. And there's so many wonderful things to see in a city like London that I think some people will realize this is a great opportunity to do that.
Yes. Celia, what's your views? Isolation, vacation, or city centre?
Yeah, so I'm inclined to agree with Merillee. I think also, you know, as we start to see changes to how people work, and I do think the fact that all businesses have been able to decamp everyone to work from home and do it successfully will have long-term implications for the world of work and how people work. And I think in a world where people are going to be working a lot more from home, when they are going on holiday, they will be looking for a different experience to the one in which they live. So if they live in a city centre, they may well be looking to get out of that city centre and go to a slightly more rural location, and vice versa. So I do think that presents opportunities. I don't think that cities like London will inherently be seen as being less safe because they will be less crowded. And so for that very reason, people will feel that they can experience London in a different way, as Merillee has said. I think the attractions are still going to be there. I think the only long-term impact could be around how they experience it. So, you know, if they are going to restaurants and theatres and having to wear masks, you know, to what extent that puts them off coming to city centres. But I think the desire and the appetite will still be there.
Deborah, I suppose the flip side to the sort of city-rural debate is if your portfolio is fairly concentrated in a specific area. I mean, London's a large area, but you know, it can, in the countryside, it can be very diverse and very fragmented. It's easier to keep those standards going in a smaller geographical area. So you could actually probably argue you've got a better chance of having somewhere safe in a city than spread out around the country.
No, absolutely. I mean, I always think of it like as a hotel on wheels, this industry. Yeah. It's you know, they move from place to place, and you're absolutely right. The density in a city really helps in terms of delivery of that. I think going back to the earlier question, I think there's the level of community support and making sure that communities feel that this is all operating professionally and they're supported, but there are ways of conquering that, as Merillee said. You know, why wouldn't the cleaners go around the entrance area to a set of apartments and make sure the buttons are cleaned and all of that sort of stuff as part of their in and out process? Whereas I don't know if you went down to Cornwall or even Devon, where I live, then actually it's a lot harder to operate those little smaller, tinier operations and implement all the processes that really need to be consistently updated.
Yeah, and what do you think about the competition with, you know, regular hotels? Because again, a hotel could come out with a very strong statement on health and safety and sanitation, but at the same time, any hotel has areas where you're going to expect lots of people to congregate. It's kind of what hotels do, and it's the way they operate. And that might be something that people say, well, that's not what I want to do anymore. Do you think this sector's got a chance to sort of promote itself as being an option where, you know, you're going to be guaranteed not to have to be in a large crowd at any point?
I mean, we accredit across the industry, so that's really quite an interesting question. So we've had quite a lot of take up from both business hotels and leisure hotels as well. And clearly their services are being impacted and will be restricted at first. You know, we're not going to have open spas or probably not open restaurants in the short term. So they're having to really think about, people are talking about dark kitchens. So there's only takeaways that come into the building rather than food being prepared on site. Yeah. There's a lot more touch points in a hotel. We've developed a risk assessment that basically goes through a red, amber, green set of traffic lights and a scoring mechanism. And Merillee will tell you some of the research we've done. It's definitely, this industry is definitely less of an issue in terms of that risk level. So they are going to have to adapt services completely in hotels, whereas actually I think enhanced services in the sharing market, in this short-term rental market, where there's enhanced cleaning and things like that, it's only going to attract more customers in whichever segment they're going to come from.
Yeah, that's the case, isn't it, Merillee? I mean, social distancing takes away some of the advantages of being in a hotel. If you're going to have to order in food, well, you do that in a property, wouldn't you? So what's the advantage of being in a hotel? So there may be some prospect there to promote the idea of
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that people will appreciate private space, but I also think they'll appreciate the space that you get in a home. I mean, typically if you look at the price of a home, per bedroom, you're able to get a whole flat or a whole home for the price often of what you might pay for a hotel room. And so especially in this kind of post-COVID world, it allows people to have some space to kind of enjoy a home from home. And where they choose a professional company, then it also offers them that possibility to have the same standards that they would be expecting from a brand. Yeah. And I think that mix, the companies, hopefully like Under the Doormat and like others in the sector who get that mix right of providing that private property combined with the right standards, I think that's a really positive mix that consumers are going to be gravitating towards in this new world.
And assuming you're right that we're going to see some happen domestically in countries like the UK, but others where there's high demand to travel within the borders, is there? Do you think there's enough supply there to cope with that kind of demand if it does suddenly go crazy and we are sort of allowed to do it? And what will do, if that's not the case? Will prices go up?
I mean, look, I think supply-wise, what's great about our industry is that it's flexible. So, where there is demand, more owners think, well, hold on a second, maybe I could do this when I'm away. Yeah. So I think the flexibility of the industry means that your supply and demand often match each other much better than, something like the hotel industry where you need 5 years to plan to build a hotel and then you build it. And by the time it opens, the demand profile may have changed. So I think from that perspective, if there is an increased demand, I think we'll find lots of owners, particularly if we see an economic recession, owners who've never done it before, wanting to get involved and work with companies that can help them rent out their property and earn that extra income, so that they can afford their own holidays.
I suppose you'd see that at Love Home Swap if there is that demand there and people think this is an option, you should see more people coming on your platform to offer their properties.
Yes, and it's actually something we're starting to see, and we've really only noticed it over the last 2 to 3 weeks, where we have started to see that pick up. And interestingly, some of the TV programs that have been filmed post-COVID, where they are talking about travel options, have started to talk about home swapping as a credible alternative. And it's interesting, we've always seen ourselves as a niche operator with our model. Home swapping isn't for everybody, but we think it will perhaps become slightly more mainstream than even we thought it could be.
Yeah. Look, we're nearly at time here, and we've done quite a good session here. Let's just have a quick last sort of final question for all three of you to take on. A bit of crystal ball, future thinking here, and what you think are going to be the key changes that we'll see in this sector as a result of COVID-19 that aren't going to be short term, but are going to be with us forever. That's changed the industry. Everyone's talking about a reset, not just of your sector, but of travel in general. So what do you think we're going to see as the long-term impact? Can we start with Merillee on that, and we'll go to Celia and then Deborah?
Yeah, I mean, look, from my point of view, I think there's 3 key things that we're going to see. I think consumers are going to be more cautious and looking for professionalism and standards. So I think the operators who are strongest in delivering those are going to have the strongest brands. And I think that's something that consumers will look out for, and those brands will emerge as leaders in the industry as we move forward. I think the second thing is that we will see consolidation in this industry. And I think that will come in 2 forms. I think one, you will see companies buying each other out and things like that. But what I also think you'll see is smaller companies looking for partners. I mean, ultimately, that's why we launched Hosperia, is so that smaller companies can be a part of something bigger without having to grow their team, and they can still focus on what they're good at locally. But not just see themselves as getting lost in an OTA world. And I think the third thing that's going to be really important is that both the hosts and the guests are really going to depend even more on trust. So I think where trust has always been a part of what we do in our industry, I think that's going to be an even more enduring factor And I think, you know, anyone who's involved that's able to create that trust is going to be far more successful. So I think what you'll see is some of the potential commercialization of the industry. You know, we've heard about, you know, cities where it's over tourism and homes being changed into kind of de facto hotels. I think, you know, there has been a bit of a shock because of COVID, which means that some people might choose to rent out year round if they're really a commercial operator. And I think that will bring the heart back into the industry for companies like Love Home Swap and Under the Doormat that have always had that core of the industry in mind. That's great. For people who are looking at this as a great way to just make an increased yield, maybe some of them have learned that this isn't the industry to do that.
Yeah. Celia, sort of a back to basics approach then. Is that something you agree with?
So I'd say 4 things from my perspective. One, which builds on what Merillee was saying around the trust element. I think that people will be looking for authenticity and arguably the personal touch. So I do think smaller, potentially family-run businesses will do well. Private homes, anything where they feel they can eyeball the person who kind of owns it and is ultimately responsible, I think will do well. I think the second thing is the impact on climate change. We've seen globally that, you know, lockdown has had a really positive impact on climate change. And I think that has, you know, that will be welcomed by many people. And so I do think there's likely to be some sort of pressure to balance our desire for travel against responsibility when it comes to climate and how we try and balance those. I think the third trend for me, which is here to stay, will be a complete shortening of the booking window. I think consumers will book much, much later, and will only make their plans pretty close to the point of travel, potentially even within 6 weeks of their arrival date. And then I think the last thing for me is I think people's needs will become more modest. You know, I think we've all learned to appreciate the little things in this process. And so I think, you know, the days of people expecting the grand trips will change. I think we will perhaps be more considerate as tourists, valuing travel a lot more, and potentially also likely to spend a little bit longer in the destinations we travel to. So perhaps travel less, but when we do go somewhere, really try and explore it and understand the culture a little bit deeper.
Yeah, okay. The final word to Deborah. I don't know what's been left for you, Deborah.
I don't know, but 2 things I could pick up on that movement from commercialization to less reliance on digital and more on customer service, and probably just back to old-fashioned hospitality, to be honest. I just think that has a real role to play, and then it is around what Celia said. It's for me, it's not just climate, it's about ethical and being responsible completely as in terms of an operation, and from that aspect I come back to that whole almost caring about individuals. It's about well-being and mental health, and I do think we're going to see a shift in society which will be reflected in the whole way we travel and what we do going forward, which can only be a good thing.
Well, lovely. Look, on that really positive note, we shall end, and I actually probably just hope that things come back in good time. I mean, I think, you know, we understand the situation everyone's in from a health point of view, but the industry really needs to get back to working again, you know, sooner rather than later, and we just all hope that can happen safely. So look, thank you very much, guys, for joining us today. I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
That's great, and I wish you all the best, and keep safe. Thank you.